in the 2021 calendar is that, like we did with Mount Daniel with the move, we were considering, because we're going to do a winter move into George Mason, giving a day before and a day after winter break to Henderson and Mason students, so that staff could make the move. Why Henderson, you might ask? And it is because 70% of our kids at Henderson take a high school course. They don't all take it with a high school teacher, but a number of them do. So if the high school is out, those students wouldn't have a place to go. So it really would be a joint, and because they're going to be conjoined now too, it may make sense for us to have both of those facilities off, so that if we need to move through Henderson, we can do that. But those are two additional days that we were considering as days off for our students. So some questions that have come up to date. What are our neighboring jurisdictions doing with their calendar? I think I've hit that one. What about the jurisdictions where our staff live? I think I've hit that one, so we've shared that data with you. Are there any efficiencies that could be gained by aligning with our neighbors, or points of friction? I think the point of friction for us potentially could be if we're not aligned, and I think that has come into play, particularly when the big neighbor next door, where the vast majority of our staff live, aren't able to arrange for childcare when we have school and they don't. So I think that there are some efficiencies that could be found by looking at some commonalities where possible, and I just think that's a consideration. Would moving to an earlier date affect our hiring competitiveness? So you all know, and I think you heard this not too long ago in a report from Kristen Michael, we are doing quite a bit of early hiring. We're getting out to staff hiring fairs across the Commonwealth and the region, actually. And so I actually don't think that it would impact our hiring, whether we went earlier or stayed with our current date, unless someone moved here and couldn't afford to live in the city of Falls Church and live somewhere else where their start date for their kids were different. So again, that could impact our capacity to hire. Would it affect our student standardized testing achievement? If so, how? It's hard to know exactly, but I can tell you with authority that the more days you have of instruction, the better your students are going to do. And so one of the things that we must pay attention to is how many days of instruction prior to those windows do we get. Are there any issues with an earlier start date with the general government? And I spoke with Wyatt Shields, and I also spoke with Danny Schlitt, who would be the two most impacted, I think. And the answer was no, that there wouldn't be any conflicts or any issues if we started earlier than Labor Day with either of them. In fact, Danny Schlitt is really excited about any and all possibilities, because he really wants to provide more services to our schools, and he just wants to know. So he's been asking, and Danny, if you're watching, I'm sorry I can't tell you. I don't know. And then lastly, would an earlier start date have any impacts on building energy use or expenditures, especially with increasing late summer warmth for climate change? And I think one of the things that we know right off the bat is by building this new high school, we're going to find some really nice efficiencies, so there will be some drops in utility. But in our older buildings, those AC units that are running potentially would need to run for a little bit longer in the summer. If we were to start earlier, it would be a couple of weeks, but though they're running anyway, because our buildings are being cleaned by the custodians during that time. So I'm not sure that there would be any significant cost savings unless we really took a hard look at, and this may be something that we can do for the future too, is potentially even shutting down some buildings for a portion of the summer. But we have so much going on, whether it's summer camps, summer instruction, cleaning schedules, and the like, that it would be hard to be able to do that. Yes, sir.
In order to do a apples to apples comparison, I think we'd want to look at like the average utility expenditure for the last week of August vice the additional week we might need in June if we didn't start earlier. So
Okay.
it's not a net positive. I mean, you might actually spend more in June than you would in August.
Why don't we take a look at that and provide that as part of the analysis, just to see. can somebody capture that? Thanks.
Just a couple of more questions. Is June 15th was sort of based on the old start date? So is June 15th still the norm that the board wants to have as kind of a not to exceed date? And I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there, that maybe with this additional flexibility, we would have a different not to exceed date. I don't know. And then I guess the second question is, if you were to start to think about something like a 2-week spring break or something, where you'd have maybe a slightly earlier start date, but a June 15th end date, which would effectively shorten summer. With respect to loss of math and other skills during the summer, is there any research that says a shorter summer break is better for not forgetting things, or
You
is
are
that something we
channeling
need to
your
be
inner
thinking about?
Karen Sharp.
I'm not going there, but
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
throwing it out there.
Yeah, so first thing is the ending start date of June 15th. As I understand it, that was just sort of the will of the board to try to make sure that we didn't go in too deep into the summer. I suspect that with the shifting capacity that we have, whether we start earlier or start after Labor Day, that there would be some flexibility. So, but it's not a one-to-one. I think that's important to note. It's about the trade-offs that happen during the school year. So sort of to your point, if we started 2 weeks early, say August 24th, and that's the first date we could start, we still may end June 15th. But we could do it with potentially with a 2-week spring break or a longer winter break or. There's a number of iterations that are in there. So I think the June 15th date probably holds if we have a post-Labor Day start. That would be my guess, because that would be the way things have traditionally been done. But if we did a pre-Labor Day start, there may be some flexibility with that, so long as it was either by the 15th or even earlier. But I do want to try to disabuse everyone of the notion that it's a one-for-one. If we start 5 days earlier, we get out 5 days earlier. It's just not how it works, based on where holidays are and things like that. With respect to your second question, and it kind of goes to your first question with a longer spring break, yes, there's a lot of research out there about the summer slide and what you can do to help alleviate the summer slide. There are reading programs, and the professor at Harvard who did a really great reading program, and his name escapes me. Does anybody know it? Oh, okay. Anyway, we did his reading program in a very large neighboring district for a number of years, and what we saw was, and it was very simple. Kids picked out 6 books, and they sent postcards home to the child, and he or she they sent the postcard back when their book was done, and we sent them a new book, and it was really a great thing. And what we saw was that the reading loss comparative to those students that weren't reading was shrunken. So I think that there is yes, there's a lot of research about summer slide. 2, yes, there are ways to mitigate summer slide. And 3, do we do a lot in our system right now to mitigate that summer slide? Probably not as much as we could do if we really wanted to spend some time focusing on that. So my question for you then is, let me give you a quick quick update on the email traffic. We have received 23 emails to date. So for the community and staff that are watching, calendar@fccps.org is the place where you can send information for that ad hoc committee to consider. And I just would remind the community, as you're sending those, your personal stories are really important to tell. And our decision-making is going to be based on the broader community. So the more you can tell us about sort of how that impacts the broader community with respect to your feedback, that would be really helpful. So that'll all be shared. So I'd ask you tonight, and we've answered some of the questions here, but are there additional questions that you want us to wrestle with or wrestle to the ground to try to get you information? And then are there additional drivers that we've missed? We've given you kind of a laundry list of things that we're going to task the ad hoc committee that's going to be chaired by William Bates, and Kristen Michael's going to support William in that. But are there other things that we should be sharing with the ad hoc committee that we've missed, perhaps? short of a regression analysis that gives you all the information, because I don't know that we're going to be able to find that or do that in the time necessary. But I do think, as sort of pointed out, one of the things we know that is a driver of student performance is poverty and how we deal with some of that summer slide too. That professor, by the way, at Harvard is Jimmy Kim. And he actually worked in Fairfax County as a teacher for a while. Anyway, just FYI.
One question I've got, thank you, Dr. Noonan, for that presentation and for the breakdown on where the FCCPS staff comes from. I'm curious as to whether or not differences in schedule from our neighbors differentially affect different groups of employees. It's a lot of difference, but what I'm getting at is, I think a lot of people think about teachers and the effect on professional staff, but I wonder about support staff, bus drivers, all the other people who make the school system operate. And it would be remiss of us, I think, not to think through the full set of people who might be affected by similarities or differences in schedule.
I really appreciate that question. And in this data set that we were able to pull, we actually pulled it by percentage by position. So we can give you the administrative breakdown, professional staff, and support staff. And I'll just tell you for the record tonight, 21% of the administrative staff live in Falls Church, City of Falls Church, or surrounding Falls Church jurisdiction, in the zip code, I guess it's a better way to say it. 29% of the professional staff, so those are our teachers, and 52% of our support staff actually live in the zip code. So for a total of 37% overall. So I do take your question and appreciate it, because I do think oftentimes, and that was why I tried to say I talked to Peak, talk to Seek, and then also talk to the administrative, because we do want to get all those voices. And by the way, they all will be represented on the ad hoc committee as well.
Madam Chair, I guess, is there an IB angle to this that we should be looking at IB in the calendar, and how that's, does IB have an optimal calendar configuration? I mean, certainly the way they schedule things would suggest there's at least some norm. I don't know the answer to that. And I guess another question that I would have is now slipping my mind, so I can't remember what it was. But, oh, I know. A lot of households where the parents work, impacts on childcare, if you begin earlier, end later, or, depending on how you mix and match this, just the overall impact on both parents and staff of calendars on, and also our offering. I mean, the aftercare and, early morning care, does that get affected in any way in terms of staffing requirements? I don't know the answer to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me start with the first one, and I'll take that as a question and let us come back to you. I'd like to work with IB to see if they have a suggested calendar, or and they probably don't. They probably take the very political position of it's up to each school division. But one of the things we could look at is, are there other jurisdictions, maybe not here, but elsewhere, that are utilizing, for example, the other continuum school divisions? What do their calendars look like? Impact on childcare and staffing, it's hard to say. One of the things that when we talk with Katie Clinton of our daycare group, I think that they're open to either or. I do know that they tend to lose staff in late August because a lot of their staff are college students that are going back to school. So perhaps an earlier start may have a positive impact and be able to keep staff longer. Again, hard to know, but I can take that as a question and see what her thoughts are.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Thank you, Dr. Noonan. That was very informative. One question that we sort of touched on, but